The history of the Missouria tribe, historically known as the Nutachi, is a narrative defined by a profound paradox of nomenclature. To the world, they are the Missouri, the namesake for one of the longest rivers on the continent and the subsequent 24th state of the American Union. Yet the name Missouri itself is an exonym, a linguistic artifact of early intertribal and colonial encounters. The Illinois people, an Algonquian-speaking group, referred to the Utachi as the Wimisurita, which translates to one who has dug out canoes. This outsider's perspective was adopted by the French Jesuit explorer Jacques Marquette in 1673, who recorded the name as Wemissuri. Over centuries of phonetic shifts, this became Missouri, effectively fossilizing a descriptive label used by their neighbors rather than the tribe's own self-identifier. In their own Siouan tongue, the Chiwere language, the tribe calls themselves the Nutachi, also spelled Niutachi or Nutachi, a name of environmental precision meaning people of the river's mouth. This name refers specifically to their historical location at the confluence of the Grand River and the Missouri River, a strategic ecological niche that allowed them to dominate regional trade and travel for centuries. The tension between these two names, one signifying their technology, canoes, and the other their geography, the river's mouth, encapsulates the complexity of their historical record, where indigenous identity is often filtered through the lenses of European cartography and neighboring tribal rivals. The Nutachi were once part of a much larger parent stock that resided in the Great Lakes region, likely near Green Bay, Wisconsin. Oral traditions tell of a mass migration southward in the 16th century. This movement was not merely a relocation, but a series of cultural fissures that gave birth to distinct nations. At the confluence of the Mississippi and Iowa rivers, the first division occurred. The group that remained became the Iowa Baksoji, meaning gray snow or dusty noses. The remainder continued to the mouth of the Grand River, where the Nutachi established their dominant villages. A final split, attributed by legend to a romantic conflict between the children of two rival chiefs, saw the Otoe, Chiwere, depart further upriver into what is now Nebraska. This shared ancestry remains the bedrock of modern identity, as the Missouria eventually rejoined their Otoe kin in the 19th century to form the federally recognized Otoe Missouria tribe. To understand the Missouria before the disruptions of the 18th century, one must look toward the archaeology of the Waniota culture. From approximately 1300 CE to the era of European contact, the Waniota represented a transition from the heavily centralized Mississippian mound-building societies to the more versatile, semi-sedentary groups of the plains and prairies. The primary archaeological window into the Nutachi world is the Utes site, situated in the Great Bend of the Missouri River within present-day Saline County. The Missouria were masters of seasonal architecture, utilizing different dwelling styles depending on their economic activity. The most common structure identified at the Utes site is the Chakaruthan, or house tied together. These were round to elliptical lodges constructed from a sapling framework bent and lashed together, then covered with mats woven from reeds, cattails, or rushes. These prairie mat lodges offered a breathable, lightweight shelter ideal for the humid river valleys. For more permanent seasonal occupation, the tribe built the Nutachi, a rectangular bark house with a gabled framework covered in large slabs of elm or other bark. These structures reflect an eastern woodland heritage, providing sturdy protection during the spring planting and autumn harvest seasons. It was only after their 19th century displacement and merger with the Otoe that the Missouria fully adopted the earth lodge, Mahachi, and the skin teepee, the Chibothraji, symbols of a transition to a more nomadic bison hunting culture on the open plains. The Missouria economy was not a static system, but a fluid, highly organized cycle that balanced horticulture with the hunt. The vernal village. In the spring, the tribe gathered in large permanent villages along the riverbanks to plant gardens. They cultivated corn, beans, squash, and pumpkins. A hallmark of Nutachi agriculture was the use of bison scapula, shoulder blade bones, which were sharpened and lashed to wooden handles to serve as durable garden hose. The summer prairie. After the crops were established, the villages were largely abandoned for communal bison hunts on the prairie. During this time, they lived in teepees and adopted a mobile lifestyle. The autumn harvest. The tribe returned to the river villages in late summer to harvest and process the crops, drying corn and squash for winter storage. The winter dispersal. During the coldest months, the large villages broke into smaller family bands that moved into protected, timbered river valleys to hunt deer, elk, and other forest game. This balance allowed the Missouria to maintain high population densities, estimated at over 10,000 in the early 1700s, while exploiting both the fertile soils of the river bottoms and the rich animal resources of the tallgrass prairie. Spirituality and social organization were inextricably linked for the Niutachi. Their villages were physical maps of their cosmology, divided by an east-west path that followed the sun's journey across the sky. This duality extended to tribal governance. Leadership was not vested in a single permanent chief, but rotated between the clans to ensure cosmic balance. Traditionally, the Bear Clan and the Buffalo Clan shared the primary responsibility for the tribe's welfare, with leadership shifting every 6 months. This structural equilibrium reflects a deep-seated belief in the necessity of harmony between the physical and spiritual worlds. A worldview that permeated everything from house construction to hunting rituals. The Missouria's first contact with Europeans was characterized by a period of commercial and diplomatic prominence. When Jacques Marquette encountered them in 1673, he recognized their strategic position as the gatekeepers of the Missouri River trade. For the French, the Missouria were the essential partners needed to unlock the riches of the western interior. The pivotal figure of the early colonial era was Étienne de Vignard, Sieur de Bourgmont. A former soldier and coureur des bois, Bourgmont had integrated himself into Missouria society as early as 1712, eventually marrying a Missouria woman, the daughter of a high-ranking chief. This marriage was more than a personal union. It was a diplomatic cornerstone that secured a military and trade alliance between the Missouria nation and the French Empire. In 1723, Bourgmont was commissioned to build Fort Orleans near the Missouria villages. The fort served as the first European military outpost on the Missouri River and acted as a primary hub for the fur trade. During this time, the Missouria were at the peak of their influence, assisting Bourgmont in brokering peace with the Paducah, Plains Apache, and acting as a bulwark against Spanish expansion from the southwest. In one of the most remarkable instances of early transatlantic diplomacy, Bourgmont escorted a delegation of native leaders to Paris in 1725. The group included chiefs from the Missouria, Otoe, Osage, and Illinois, along with Bourgmont's Missouria wife, Niutachi, Sacred Woman. The delegation was received with the honors typically reserved for high-ranking foreign ambassadors. They met with the young King Louis XV at Versailles, hunted with the royal court at Fontainebleau, and attended performances at the Paris Opera. Niutachi made such an impression on the French aristocracy that they dubbed her the Missouri Princess. Her presence in Paris serves as an early example of indigenous diplomatic agency. She was baptized in the Cathedral of Notre Dame and purportedly married Sergeant Dubois, a colleague of Bourgmont, in a ceremony that captivated the Parisian public. The visit was not merely a social tour, but a strategic mission by the Nutachi and their allies to secure direct trade agreements and military support. The Illinois chief Chicago delivered a formal speech to the India Company, emphasizing that while they loved the French, they were masters of their own lands and expected to be treated as sovereign partners. This period represents the high watermark of Missouria political power, as they effectively navigated the complexities of European imperial competition. The decline of the Missouria from a dominant regional power to a remnant people was swift and brutal, driven by the dual pressures of biological warfare in the form of disease and relentless intertribal conflict. Epidemic disease was the most significant factor in Missouri depopulation. Lacking any natural immunity to Eurasian pathogens, the tribe suffered catastrophic mortality rates from smallpox, measles, and influenza. Smallpox, which the Osage feared as little mystery people, struck the Missouria repeatedly throughout the 18th century. The impacts were both demographic and cultural. When a large percentage of a community dies in a short window, the chain of memory, the oral transmission of history, religious rituals, and technical crafts, is broken. Archaeological evidence suggests that post-epidemic indigenous societies often showed a decline in specialized skills, such as pottery and weaving, as the master artisans succumbed to the disease before they could train a new generation. As the Missouria were weakened by disease, they became targets for the Sauk-Sac and Meskwaki fox. These Algonquian nations, themselves displaced from the Great Lakes by the French and Iroquois, were moving westward with aggressive territorial intent. In 1730, a massive Sauk and Meskwaki attack nearly annihilated the Missouria, killing hundreds and forcing the survivors to seek temporary refuge with the Otoe, Osage, and Kansa. Although the tribe eventually returned to their villages near the Grand River, they were never again a dominant military force. The final collapse of the Missouria as an independent political entity occurred in the 1790s. In 1792, a devastating ambush at Fox Prairie by the Sauk and Meskwaki inflicted such heavy casualties that the remaining Nutachi abandoned their villages entirely. By 1795, the survivors had officially merged with the Otoe on the Platte River in Nebraska, seeking safety in numbers. When the Lewis and Clark expedition headed up the Missouri River in the summer of 1804, they found the Missouria living in integrated villages with the Otoe. The expedition's primary goal was to establish United States sovereignty over the newly acquired Louisiana Territory and to notify Native nations of the change in Great Father from the Spanish or French to President Thomas Jefferson. On August 3, 1804, at a site known as Council Bluff, the Otoe and Missouria became the first tribes to hold a formal diplomatic council with the American representatives. Meriwether Lewis and William Clark presented the chiefs with peace medals and commissions, along with a document that offered peace and friendship, while simultaneously asserting the legal authority of the United States over their lands. This council initiated a peculiar and lasting relationship with the U.S. government, one that would soon transition from diplomatic partnership to forced land cessions. The Missouria, already reduced by war and disease, were now facing a new kind of threat: the legal and demographic pressure of American westward expansion. Between 1830 and 1854, the Otoe Missouria were coerced into a series of treaties that systematically stripped them of their ancestral territory. This era was marked by the Paper Trail, a sequence of legal documents that extinguished indigenous land claims in Missouri and Iowa. In 1830, the tribes signed the Treaty of Prairie du Chien, ceding their extensive hunting grounds in Iowa to the government to make room for white settlers. This was followed by the Treaty of 1833, which forced them away from their villages on the Platte and Missouri rivers to a new site at Uton, Nebraska. Here they were introduced to formal Western education and Christian missionizing, further pressuring their traditional way of life. The final significant land loss in the Missouri region occurred with the 1836 Platte Purchase, which cleared the remaining native titles from northwest Missouri. By the 1840s, the Nutachi were a landless people living on the sufferance of the U.S. government in eastern Nebraska. In 1854, under immense pressure from the Commissioner of Indian Affairs, George Manypenny, the Otoe Missouria signed a treaty ceding nearly all their remaining lands south of the Platte River. In exchange, they were granted the Big Blue Reservation, a 162,000-acre strip of land on the Kansas-Nebraska border. The transition to reservation life was a period of extreme physical and spiritual suffering. Corrupt Indian agents often stole the tribe's annuity payments, and the encroaching white settlers frequently squatted on reservation lands, leading to constant conflict. The tribe, now numbering fewer than 500 people, struggled to adapt to a life of restricted movement and government-mandated farming. The suffering on the Big Blue Reservation catalyzed an ideological fracture within the Otoe Missouria that would define the tribe for decades. This split was not based on clan or family lineages, but on a fundamental disagreement regarding the survival of the nation in the face of American assimilation. The Quaker Band, influenced by the presence of Quaker missionaries and agents, believed that the only way to avoid total extinction was to adopt the ways of the dominant society. The Coyote Band, led by the defiant chief medicine horse, Shongimonkan, viewed the Big Blue Reservation as a prison. They believed that the only way to perpetuate their traditional tribal life was to leave Nebraska entirely and move to Indian Territory, Oklahoma, where they hoped for more freedom. The tension escalated throughout the 1870s until the Coyote Band, consisting of approximately 160 people, effectively escaped the reservation and made their own way south to Indian Territory, settling temporarily with the Sac and Fox.